Get rid of it.
You can still ask for it, see if council has to vote on it, but typically parking and speed limits and that kind of stuff usually originate with the police department.
I figured so, but okay, here's the thing. So I got some complaints this afternoon, and it's not only just that, because I do it all the time myself. I can't say I don't. I do reverse park. I park on the wrong side of the street, and I'm facing that way, and you know what? Forget it. I don't care.
How are you?
I didn't realize you could get a ticket for that today.
Yeah.
And then I got a call from a friend of mine who lives in this neighborhood, and he was like, hey, he was like, the PD come swinging through here and gave everybody tickets. And I was like,
You wanna know when they
Go ahead and get started. Thank everybody for being here. We'll go through the agenda for next week. We'll get started tonight. Miss Caroline Swope is going to give us a little presentation into what's been going on with the historic preservation. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, so apparently I have to make this exciting. I'll do my best. So this is the yearly council update on historic preservation. This is actually mandated as part of our CLG agreement with the federal government, which y'all might not be aware of. Next, please. So I'm going to run you through some images and give you sort of a quick background. Most of you are probably familiar with, you've heard National Register, it might sort of ring a bell. Next, please. But sometimes people aren't always familiar with sort of how this works and what a CLG means. So certified local government, and that is what Decatur is. We have a signed contract with the feds. It normally is administered through the state agency, and that is the Alabama Historical Commission for us. And we have special benefits with that. We can receive grants from the federal government via the state that are reserved for certified local governments. We get technical assistance from the state. We also have legal status as a consulting stakeholder in federally funded projects. It doesn't sound like much, but sometimes it actually can really amount to a lot. We do have responsibilities, though, to do that. We have to maintain a historic preservation commission. We are required to survey historic properties and or archaeological sites if we have those. We are expected to enforce state and local preservation laws, to review National Register nominations, and to provide a venue for public participation in historic preservation. I will tell you now, due to COVID, we have not worked on that last one quite as much this year, and we've had to cancel a lot of things with that. Next, please. So our 2020 activities, and it's been a really busy year, both for me as staff person that assists the commission and for the commission as a whole. Been working on updating digital files for the city's webpage. So we do have a webpage. I'd like to see it more robust. I'm starting to put more data on there. We have updated our operating procedures. Council went through and reviewed that and also voted on that, I think 3 or 4 months ago. So that was done this past year. I oversaw a grant to update Old State Bank. So if you've been at Old State Bank and you've noticed last year we were getting, this is sort of fiscal year, new paint, new bathrooms, new shades. The old ones had started to rot off the walls. That is money that we had access to. I have assisted in acquiring funding for the Princess, the Carnegie, and the City Cemetery. And all of those are either National Register or National Register eligible, and those are things that we have access to funds for because of that. Acquired a grant to produce a children's publication to celebrate our city's 200th birthday. That is actually in its final proof now. We expect to have those printed copies within a week, and it's pretty exciting. It was geared to work with the city schools with 4th graders because that's the year they learn about state history. So we're our 200th anniversary as a city. We picked 20 buildings. It was really hard to come down to 20 sites within the city that really showcased everything within the city that we have to offer. Received a grant to train commission members. That will actually happen in this next fiscal year. That is coming up in January. We have a legal expert in preservation law, architectural historians, and someone who is specialized in alternative materials. So as we look at, are there other materials besides wood windows that the commission could be looking at? Those are things that we're bringing in experts. We are partnering with the city of Huntsville and the city of Tuscumbia on that. So we're bringing that into the upper end of the state. We received a grant to update Bank Street, Old Decatur National Register District. Y'all just authorized us signing on to that with the mayor, I believe, in your last session. We are supposed to update our National Register inventory every 10 years, in theory. Normally happens every 15 years. Ours hasn't been reviewed since 1990, which is the year the Sony Walkman came out. So it's past due for review, and it is going to be reviewed. We'll explain a little bit more why that's important. It's not just a paper exercise, although it might feel like it at times. Part of the work that I do that is not commission dependent is I work with local developers and property owners on federal tax credit rehabilitation projects and state tax credit rehabilitation projects. We are, to my knowledge, the only municipality in the state that has a staff person that do that. Normally, if a developer wants that, they have to find an outside professional to do that. I have done that with other entities before I worked with the city. But it really occurred to me that Decatur was sort of missing some traction because as a small city, the big developers don't often pay attention or they don't know who they can go to in a smaller municipality. It's much easier if you're in Atlanta to know who to call. So within my first year, we have secured almost $2.2 million on projects. So that's really exciting. We are in the process of identifying updates to our design review guidelines, reviewing code, and identifying future survey sites. And these are things that will take more than a year to sort of move through the process. Next, please. I've tied into One Decatur plan. I know y'all are familiar with the plan. It was adopted in 2018. And when I sort of went through the key findings, I was like, okay, what do I see that's lining up with what the commission does and what my position is with the city? Things that I saw were looking for a fast-track COA process so people do not have to wait 4 to 6 weeks for review for projects, protections on downtown buildings, restore buildings, enforce maintenance codes, invest in preservation efforts, encourage revitalization of homes near Delano Park, and I believe they're referring to homes to the south of the park, expand historic district, require commission review before demolition, and educate property owners. Next, please. So where I have worked on these fast-track COA process, we have one. I would say 80% of the projects that we get can be reviewed by staff now, and that process was set up. It took about a year to set that process up. Require HP review before demolition, we do have that. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily in the form everybody would like it to be, and that's certainly something we can look at our peers across the state and other cities and see what their codes and guidelines are like and see how ours sort of fit in. Educate property owners, that is a ongoing process. We do have now every closing attorney in the city that works with a lot of properties within the historic district, they have a letter on file from me that is to go into the closing packet for anyone that purchases a house in either of the historic districts, so they are aware. That won't help us if their closing attorney is outside of Decatur. We are getting ready to work with real estate agents as well, but it doesn't mean that there'll be 100% success because some of the players are not within the city. Investing in preservation efforts, that really probably is the tax credit. These are projects that would not have those kinds of resources if we weren't helping them file that paperwork. Enforcing maintenance codes, I'm working with code enforcement on that. Encouraging the revitalization of homes near Delano Park. I was approached the very start of this fiscal year by some property owners that really wanted to expand the overlay. So we had several meetings with them, the council rep met with them, and the ball is now in their court if they would like to proceed in what they're interested in. And when they come back, I'd be more than happy to engage with them. Expand the historic district. I believe when people were writing that, they may have been talking about that area. And then need protections on downtown buildings. Our downtown buildings currently do not have any sort of design review, and that is something that has been discussed with different players. Next, please. There we go. That's our National Register. I know y'all have seen these plaques. They're all over the place. Next, please. So everyone's like, well, it's on the National Register. What does this mean? It's on the National Register. You will see two of our districts there, Old Decatur and Albany. What most people don't realize is the National Register is designed to protect properties from any adverse effect from federally funded projects. That means you as a private property owner can do anything you want and you don't have to ask permission, period. I have owned a house on the National Register before. I could have bulldozed it the very next day and wouldn't have had to fill out a single piece of paperwork. And people often are surprised by this because they think National Register means protection. National Register means protection from federally funded. And it's not a guarantee, it's just a level of review. So what you need instead is a sort of a local overlay, which is sort of works in tandem with it. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Next, please. So National Register, we have 5 National Register districts in the city. We have Bank Street, Old Decatur. They were originally 2 districts. They were merged in 1990, so it's 1. We have Albany Residential. We have Albany Commercial, which is 2nd Avenue. We have East Old Town and West Old Town. Those are all on the National Register. And again, this is to assist any sort of, like, if the federal government was going to expand a highway near them, they would be treated very carefully. So the advantage to being on the National Register is you are eligible for federal historic tax credits. That's sort of a funding source. So we'll talk about that briefly. This is going to be any buildings in these districts that are listed as contributing, and you also can have individual buildings outside the districts that are listed as contributing. Why the historic tax credit? What is it? The city has community assets that are often dormant. These are buildings that need substantial upgrades. They can be 100 years old. They could be 150 years old. They could need all sorts of retrofitting, whether it be plumbing, electrical, structural, and those things get expensive. And so buildings kind of have this cycle where those start to decay because nobody wants to invest that money. Historic tax credit, if you go through the federal program, it is a return of 20 cents on the dollar of approved expenses, and it covers most of the stuff you would expect. There is also a state tax credit that's 25 cents on the dollar. You can stack them. At this point, we now have 45 cents on the dollar available for your investment. That's a fair amount of money if stacked. Now, the federal one is only eligible if it's income producing. It will not help a private property owner with their home. The state one is competitive. They have limited funds, but it is available for private property owners. These projects have to reach a certain threshold. This is not a, oh, I want a new coat of paint. It's a substantial percent of the building's value. These are buildings that are under duress, and if they sit there longer, they're going to have a catastrophic effect within their block, within that community as they decay. And I think we've all seen these buildings, whether they're in residential neighborhoods or commercial neighborhoods, that just sit there and rot, and it drives everyone around them crazy because they're starting to decay. The advantage of historic tax credits, about 75% of the economic benefits are in wages and a little bit in materials. And that's huge because you're not bringing in inexpensive labor to throw up something cheaply. You normally have skilled craftspeople. And so that is money that is staying directly in the community and not going off as much to the big box stores. And so you're restoring these underutilized buildings, and that's what sort of starts driving community investment. Next, please. And you don't want to lose your buildings, as we see. And most of you probably recognize this building because when we lose the buildings, it's a little bit like you now have a missing tooth and a smile, and it changes the way you approach space, and you get a lot of vacant lots. Next, please. Which brings us to the tower building. This is one of the tax credits. Just received word today that they have been approved on the last step of their federal paperwork to start the process. So this was a case where I just happened to meet the developer at it was a presentation on tax credits, and he said he had some funds. He was interested in looking at municipalities. I was like, let me go through some buildings with you. And I spent a day with him in about a dozen buildings downtown and just saying, this would be a good candidate, this would be a good candidate, this is what's expected. He went for the biggest building out there, which is the tower building. It's going to be a really interesting project. It's probably about $5 million in that ballpark, and almost $2 million of that is expressly through tax credits. So this is going to be a huge investment. Next. So then we get to the historic overlay, and this is where people get confused, and sometimes you might hear questions. We have these National Register districts, but we also have local overlay. These are zoning overlays. Our local districts are not identical to the National Register district. If you pulled up a map of the National Register district and you pulled up a map of our local overlay, they're not identical. Local overlay, the citizens voted to create that zoning overlay, and some people on the fringes didn't want it. It was essentially a majority. And that's when council, this was in the 90s when this passed. So once those overlays are locked in, it is zoning. And that's why people are like, well, it wasn't on the deed or the title. Well, neither is your zoning overlay. It is indeed just a zoning overlay. This is designed to protect properties from adverse impact regardless of funding resource. So it doesn't matter who owns it. Is the building going to be okay in this process? Next, please. And this is what the commission overviews. So if you look at these two maps, the one with the green and the red, the green is actually the local overlay. If you look at the yellow and the orange, that's the National Register district. And you'll see how the green is indeed smaller. So they're not as big. We do not currently review commercial buildings because that's not part of our ordinance. It could change. Certainly some municipalities do add it, but right now that's not part of what the commission does. Commissioners. So we have 7 commissioners. They are quasi-judicial when they hand down their rulings. So we have a space reserved for an architect or a landscape architect. We have a space reserved for an archivist. We have one material specialist right now. We have one experienced remodeler. The others traditionally come from either the old Decatur or the Albany Historic Districts themselves, so they're property owners that rotate. All commissioners are required to train several hours a year per state requirements. This year we're having the specialized training that I mentioned. Next, please. Commissioners work on what is called a certificate of approval. So if you own a property within this district, anything on the exterior, for the most part, of the building, the fence, landscaping, big changes, it has to have a certificate of appropriateness. And there are two possible tracks. Anything routine, minor, can be fast-tracked. I have the authority to review that because these are routine decisions that are made. We know what the commission's stance is on that. Anything major, an addition, new infill, those go in front of the full commission for review. And anything that could potentially, if I don't see that there has been enough precedence on it, or something that comes up and I'm like, I can't tell by our code, I've never seen the commission rule on this, I will send it directly to the commission as well. As staff, I do not have the authority to sort of veto a COA. The commission has that final decision. So if I can't say yes, it automatically goes to the commission, and they're the ones who look at it. Next, please. And this, I mean, you've been through the district. These are sort of the larger houses, and we've got a really great Victorian, and then we have a Craftsman they've been working on for a couple years down below in Albany, which is fantastic. And people will often think, well, these districts are so fabulous, they're going to be fine. Why do they need this extra level of review? Next, please. Well, this is not an indicator, but you'd be surprised how often these things happen. I could give you examples from Huntsville. Next, please. People are like, well, why do you do fences? Well, could you imagine if the whole historic district had fences like this? It would not work. Can we go back to the fence one we just skipped? And to give you an idea of how this matters, this is a district I actually surveyed several years ago for Huntsville. And I was on the phone a couple weeks ago down with their state office because this district is going towards National Register nomination. And the comment was, we can't even see the resource, and we don't think it's going to count. Well, it's a binary system. Either you're in and you count towards the district, or you're not in and you subtract from the district, and you've got to have more ins than outs. When you can't see it because of a fence, it becomes an issue at times. So it sort of gives you an idea of what goes on. Next, please. Historic preservation and property values. We get asked this a lot, like, this is so much, we're in a historic local overlay, do we want this? It's not for everyone. There are lots of people that do enjoy it. We have people that relocate to the city specifically. The number of phone calls I get, I moved here from Savannah because I was looking for a historic district, or I moved here from Huntsville because their historic stock wasn't affordable, or can you help us, we want, and people are looking for a very specific thing. So then it's like, well, does it actually help to have this sort of oversight? Every study done by Place Economics, which is a major econ firm that researches historic preservation, has shown that there's a substantial increase in districts that have local oversight, because people are more likely to spend money if they feel like their investment is safe, and if they know that the house next to them isn't going to do anything too over the top, sort of crazy, or sort of devalue their property. So increases vary by municipality and location, but it's pretty strong. I think maybe, Mr. Jackson, I think you were on council when Mr. Ripkema spoke out at Turner Searles a few years ago. He is not a historic preservationist. He'll tell you he's an econ guy. And he's like, but I kept seeing all these crazy numbers and I wanted to see where they came from. And then he started studying historic preservation and he's like, whoa, this is where the money is. So it was really interesting in the city. The mayor brought him out a couple years ago and he sort of did a case study and we walked through and his sort of thoughts and his research. So it is sort of a two-tiered system. So if people get confused, that's why we have these two different systems. But anybody within the National Register District, so whether it's Old Town East or West, the Albany, they all have access to those tax credits as well, even if they're not looked at on the local overlay. Next, please. This is our logo from a couple years ago. It was the I Love Decatur, the I Heart Decatur campaign. So you will see this from time to time. I'm really getting the commission to focus outside the two main historic districts because we have some amazing examples of mid-century modern. Decatur had a lot of money right after World War II, and they built some really interesting buildings. These are the things we're starting to look at. What is now eligible for tax credits that might be in other neighborhoods within the city? Are there other National Register districts within the city as well? And that's on their agenda for the next year or two. And that is your official CLG update for the year. The only thing you didn't get is the boring forms I had to send the state with the charts.
Thanks, Caroline. Does anybody have any questions for Caroline? Thank you.
Okay. And once COVID's over, I want to drive around and look at other people's districts with them a little bit and see if we have some underused resources I might have funding for. But we'll wait till we're not masked up for that.
Good, thank you. Okay, we'll move through the rest of the agenda here. First thing we have is next week we'll have a proclamation recognizing Juliana Hudry, who's the first female Eagle Scout in North Alabama. Any questions there? All right, next we'll approve minutes for November 30th, 2020 work session. Any questions? All right, we'll approve the November 2020 monthly bills. Any questions there? All right, resolutions. Resolution number 20-372, approved storm shelter memorandum of understanding with Decatur City Schools. Chip?
Yes, sir, this is we did this memorandum of understanding last year for the first time. Basically with the new Austin and Decatur High Schools, we are able to provide storm shelters in designated areas within the building that are monitored and maintained during the storm shelter time by the police department. And it worked last year. It's renewed annually. The school board made a couple of minor changes that didn't have any clean up, change and disinfect, that kind of thing. And there's the police department is satisfied with the way it operates. The school board has approved it, and it's we would recommend it being approved for the year.
Okay, any questions? Thanks, Chip. Resolution number 20-373, approve ALDOT agreement for grading landscaping US 31 and Wilson Street. Is Jason on the line?
I am.
Can you speak to that one, Jason?
I can. This is a project through DDRA where they're using HANAs to do a portion there on 6th Avenue to landscape that, make it look better. He asked us to, once that is done and completed, to take over and, take over the maintenance for it. This is something that Superior takes care of in our other locations. So we got with them, and it would be about $450 a month, about $5,400 a year to keep the site that they're talking about maintained, looking good.
Okay, any questions? All right, the next one, resolution number 20-375, agreement with ALDOT to maintain space in vicinity of US 31 and Wilson Street intersection. That's the same thing, Jason?
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions for either one of those? All right, resolution number 20-374, approved change order number 1 for STIRS Boys and Girls Club. Alan.
Yes, Council President, Council. This is the one and only change order that we will have for STIRS. If you all may be aware, we renovated the STIRS Daycare Center, or not daycare, I'm sorry, it's the STIRS Boys and Girls Club for Decatur Youth Enrichment to have a space. They lost their space that they previously had, so this change order basically was for asbestos removal in the mastiff tile in the floors, so we had to remove that. We wasn't aware of that when we did the bid, so that's basically here's the change. I think it was like $10,000, and then there was some deductions that got it down to $7,800, I believe.
All right, any questions for Alan?
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. All right, next we have ordinance first reading, ordinance number 20-4437, approved police jurisdiction extension. Chip?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Annually, we compile all the land that has been annexed into the city and do one map that draws the police jurisdiction around the new boundaries of the city, going 1.5 miles from, used to be 3 miles, now it's 1.5 miles, unless it butts up against another city's police jurisdiction. You have to do that every year or you can't use the area. And I think you got 2 maps. Those maps show the police jurisdiction that's affected. All the impacted area is based on annexation. We just have to get that approved by the end of the year. So we're going to be asking next week to do a double vote on this. But this is just recognizing the police jurisdiction based on annexations, and so the laws that are applicable to the police jurisdiction would extend into these areas.
Why are we doing immediate consideration on that?
Because we have to have this filed with the state by the end of the year. And so we can't wait until the January meeting. We've got to do it at the meeting this coming week. It's our last one this year.
If it's not approved next week, will we have to do a special called meeting?
We would either miss the opportunity to have it, or we'd have to have a special call meeting, because you can only do it once a year. And if we did it next, in January, that would be the time we could do it for next year, so we wouldn't get anything that we annex next year.
Okay. Who has to call a special called meeting?
But I guess my question is that if we knew that this was coming, Chip, why did we not already have it so that it did not have to? I'm just curious.
I don't know. It was on the agenda when I started going through it, and it is something I know we've had. Every year I've been here, Karen Smith would draw those. I think Matthew and Joseph drew this. They have to do legal descriptions of what the new city limits are, then they draw the PJ from there.
Yeah, I guess, and that was just my curiosity because it's like, this is annual, as you said. So I was just curious.
And I will say that it has been my experience that I think because it's an annual thing that, can be drawn up, I think the drawing up of it tends to get bumped and then they run out of time. But I don't recall us having to do the double vote before. I think it's a little bit later this year.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well,
Sorry, go ahead, Herman.
This is Herman. Last year, the PJ was not impacted by those annexations. This year, because of the Morris development, it moved the PJ line in that area. That's the only change for this year.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, next ordinance number 20-4436, rename Silvercrest Drive Southwest to Onizuka Drive Southwest. Matt?
Yes, sir. No changes with that one.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's all we had on for this agenda. Any directors have anything to add? Mayor?
No, sir.
All right, anything else from council? All right, thanks.
Thank you.